evening. Hello. Well, hey, everybody. Good evening. Thank you. Keep that in mind. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. If you were here early, you already heard from me a couple times. We did a couple mic checks. But if you've just arrived in the last 10 minutes, I do want to say welcome. My name is Matt Vreda. I'm one of the pastors here at the church. And I'm just going to be incredibly honest with you guys for a moment. This has nothing to do with tonight, but to just speak something kind of funny. Usually like there's a trick when you're on the stage, you want to turn your devices off, but also, take notes. I have notes on my screens. My closest and longest friend is a massive Cincinnati Bengals fan. And I'm not. Incidentally, I'm actually a lifelong Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So I know. It's been an interesting friendship. But I wasn't watching the game. I was getting ready for tonight. And I have multiple group texts with friends from high school, college, different parts of the country, all wanting to know how this particular guy is doing and if he is buying Super Bowl tickets and if someone needs to go check on him because there's no telling how he's behaving. And I'm a little nervous to be reading my notes off my iPad tonight because I think I'm constantly going to be having to swipe away text messages from my high school friends. But on behalf of our entire staff, I want to thank you guys so much for being here tonight. We've got a packed room, which is so encouraging. Like, even if you just take a moment and think, okay, a church is having a mental health Q&A, what's going to be the turnout? And to fill the room, this alone, I feel like is so encouraging. And I know I have people watching online. Thank you so much if you're joining us there. This is a night we've been looking forward to for a while. And shortly here, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists, and we're going to hear from them for a while. But I just want to offer a couple comments about why tonight feels important to us as a church. I previously worked at another church that had sort of normalized this phrase, like, any workplace has its own kind of vernacular sometime. And we would say a lot there, it's just a season, or it's always a season. We'd use this phrase like, it's a season. And then one of my friends there, this could be a challenging place to work at times, and he said, like, if you're always saying it's just a season, is that really a season? And I was actually looking over my notes from when we hosted a similar event as to this about a year ago. And at that time, we were almost a year into the COVID pandemic. And there was a lot of language in my notes from a year ago about, like, in this season or recently. And I don't know if that's the way to talk right now. Like, if something has been 2 years, it's really a season. Feels like an era, right? And that's really not what our focus is going to be tonight. But I do just want to normalize, like, man, whether you would have thought you'd be at a spot like this or come to a gathering like this 3 or 4 years ago or 1 year ago, or this is like a recent thing that you'd even be curious about hearing about mental health at a church, I'm just glad you're here. If you've been part of Church of the City for really any length of time, and or some of you maybe not, like some of you maybe have just joined the last couple weeks, but late 2021, we started talking about this leading we feel like from God to build what we're calling the village and steward this property to build some more facilities to address some of the unique needs in our city. And Pastor Darren's talked a lot about how one of those needs is mental health. You may not realize this, but for years we've had a great Christian counselor referral network that we've always wanted to help people get help and pay attention to mental health needs, but really the last couple years especially, in response to feedback we've gotten from local government officials, things our pastors have been seeing, and learning from some of our partners who you'll hear from tonight, it's become really clear, certainly this is true nationally, but locally, if we're really going to be a church of the city, we have a part to play in addressing the mental health crisis that we're seeing around us. And I just want to add to that a little bit. That's obviously really important. But it's not only about serving our city. It's about really having some pastoral sensitivity to what are the needs of the people in our church. This fall, as our church talked about these 4 pursuits that we feel like God is calling us into, one of those is the flourishing of the city, and that's kind of where we've had this discussion around building the village. But another one of those pursuits is the formation of people. we're pursuing discipleship, intentional discipleship, through both seeing the significance of healing and growth. And when we talk about mental health, yeah, we are trying to be sensitive to the needs of our city, but we also want to recognize that all of us are on a journey. And if we are going to be sincere and honest about trying to follow Jesus, we're all going to have seasons where we need to heal. And of course, healing and growth are not mutually exclusive, but rather kind of go quite well together. And so a lot of the questions that we're going to ask our guests tonight and the topics we're going to touch on are really just the result of what our pastors have been seeing over the last year. At the end of the night, we'll share some possible next steps, and I'll introduce you to some other co-workers here at the church. And I just want you to know that like this all, like it goes together. You know, the same pastors who are receiving your calls or emails when you say, hey, I'd love to talk to somebody, or I'd love to pray with someone, they're the same voices saying, hey, it would be really cool if we could do something with the Refuge Center again. Or, hey, it would be really cool if we could do more than simply refer people to counseling. We think we got to host some stuff to elevate these conversations. And so, you know, as a church, we have these 4 pursuits. The presence of God, the formation of people, unity of the church, and the flourishing of the city. And both really the pursuit of the flourishing of our city and the formation of people have so much to do in this season with just making a space to address this. And the final thing I want to say, and then I'll invite up my friends. I'm sure all of us came tonight for a variety of reasons, and I wouldn't want to assume something about anyone. Everyone's story is unique. I'm sure some of you are here tonight because you need help, and you know you need help, and you're eager. You're coming tonight hoping for some encouragement, hoping for some advice for what you're walking through. But also know, and I know this even from some of the notes some of you all shared ahead of time, some of you are here because you're thinking of someone you care about that's hurting. Or you're thinking of someone that you're in a relationship with, and there's going to be this temptation over the next little bit here where our panelists are going to share something and you're going to think, oh, I know someone else who needs to hear that. Or you're going to hear something tonight and you're going to think, well, obviously it doesn't apply to me. I'm awesome. But me 10 years ago might have needed to hear that. Thank God that I am so great today. And I'm not suggesting you're not great today, but I just want to ask you and invite you from the beginning of this night, as much as you can, to try to be really present with what the Spirit is saying to you and how something that you might hear tonight could be part of God's invitation to you to kind of move nearer to Him. Certainly some of our questions tonight will reconnect to how we relate with other people and advice for other people, and I do not want to minimize or trivialize the fact that some of you really care about people who are not here that are hurting. That's important, but I want to resist the urge at any point to think that this is somehow about the other. This is all of us. We all need to have these conversations, and we all need to heal and grow, and I just hope tonight can be helpful in that respect. So with that, I've talked long enough. I will not talk nearly as much the rest of the night. Would you please join me in welcoming our 3 guests, Amy Alexander, Jenny Black, and Pike Williams. Come on up. Some of you see these folks and you think they look really familiar from this same event a year ago. Same group. We got the band back together. We got good enough feedback last year that we thought it was worth repeating. And something that was neat for me when we did this last year was to learn that Jenny and Amy and Pike are friends and work together and have worked together. And so even if you're newer to this conversation and you're wondering, like, is there competition between the therapist? And like, you know, if like Jenny does well tonight, it's good for her business and bad for Amy's business. So I think first of all, they're not here because they need to drum up more business. But I'll say this is a reference that some of you will totally get and others won't at all. But I have so much respect for these 3 people, and they are so good at what they do, and they have so much respect in their field. I feel a little bit like, like Phil Jackson coaching the 90s Bulls. There's this thing of like, Phil didn't really need to coach. He just rolled the ball out because the team was so talented. Jenny and Pike and Amy are awesome. And just glad to have a space for you guys to share the gifts God's given you and your wisdom. And so rather than starting with a series of questions, wanted to just give each of you a few minutes to begin by sharing what feels important to you on this topic. And it's going to each of you take a turn, sharing what matters to you, and then I'll follow up with some questions for a little bit.
I go first. I'm Jenny. I'm so happy to be with you guys tonight. I feel really honored to get a chance to speak into wherever you are and whatever you're doing. And I would say one of the biggest things on my heart tonight is just welcoming you, that it really does matter that you showed up here, that you came tonight, that you're at the table that you're at, that you're sitting next to the person who you're sitting next to. I'm going to ask you for a second just to take a minute to look around the people that are sitting with you, kind of make some eye contact, give some smiles, a little wave. If you're feeling really daring, you could do a fist bump, a high five, elbow tap. It's really important to me. It's always been important, but as long as I've been alive, it's never been this important to remember that you're human. You are human. And as Matt was talking earlier, if there's anyone here that's doing really, really well right now, please, please, please come and introduce yourself to me afterwards. I want to hear all of your secrets. I want to know everything. I want to follow you around. I want to study what you're doing because you know something that I don't know anyone else knows right now. So we have never, ever, ever been so depleted of human resources. And in my heart, I've had this picture of like during the Industrial Revolution when people started working in factories before we had any laws that protected our human resources. And I feel like as a culture, that's exactly where we are again. We're at this place where so many of us have kind of lived in two different generations or two different eras, as you were speaking, and maybe now three with the pandemic, where I used to live a life where I actually had the resources I needed to do what was being asked of me every day. And that was hard. That was hard. When I first became a marriage and family therapist, which was like maybe 12 years ago now, I remember telling someone, 12 years ago, so that, 2010, I remember telling someone, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and she took me in the corner and she said, just between you and me, there are some people around here that really need you. That's how it was in 2010. When I became a therapist, you had to have something really hard happen to your life or something really traumatic happen in your childhood, and you were the one who went to therapy because you were going through something hard. And over the last 10 years, specifically the last 11, we have reached this tipping point where the average demands for the average person are outpacing anything any of us could live up to. And that is if we're looking back at the days people were asked to work in factories for a certain amount of hours and didn't have childcare and on and on and on, we look back at that and we're like, wow, of course they were having breakdowns, right? Because we could see that they were being mistreated. Well, then we had labor laws that came into place, and we had all these things in society that were looking out for our behalf as humans. We don't have that anymore. We have broken into a new era where there is no one looking out for you. And every day you are the only one that knows, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. I hear it every single day from every single person I talk to. It doesn't matter if they're a therapist or a student or a kid in my neighborhood. It's, I can't do this. I'm being asked to do what I can't do. And there's no mom. There's no mom saying, well, honey, that's because you can't do it, because it's not humanly possible. And so in my experience, our mental health crisis is literally watching people just fall under because they think they should be able to do it, and it is not humanly possible. And if we had enough time and energy to sit with each other and hear what was going on with others, we could look at each other and say, oh, you're falling apart because it's not humanly possible what you're being asked to do. So what I want, my greatest hope for you tonight, and my greatest hope for everyone that I talk to, is that when you are in your next moment of thinking, what is wrong with me? I'm literally, whose mind isn't working anymore? Who can't remember anything? Who can't keep up with all your emails and texts? How many people have you disappointed today? Like, if you're feeling in that place, what I want you to know is it's not you. It's not you. This is the last thing I'll say, and I'll pass the baton. How many of you have seen Erin Brockovich? So, it's a tiny town, everybody starts to get sick. Everybody starts to get suffering from this same kind of cancer. And this woman who's working at this legal office basically is like, wow, why are all these people getting sick? And she ends up discovering that in this tiny town, the water is poisoned. And all these people who thought they had some individual health problem realized it wasn't them. There was something in the water. And that's what I want you to know. I want you to know it's not you. It's not you. Stop thinking that it's you. Of course you have your own trauma. Of course you have your hard thing that you're going through right now. But 10 years ago, we had the resources for dealing with them, and we had people who had resources to help us. And we are all so depleted. So I just want you to know it's not you. We're in a mental health crisis, and you happen to be in the culture that's going through it. And we'll hopefully get to talk more about some resources for building that up in this conversation.
Thanks, Jenny.
Sure. So my name is Amy Alexander. I'm the executive director and co-founder at the Refuge Center for Counseling. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you to Church of the City. COTC has been a remarkable resource to the Refuge Center. We have felt tremendously lifted up by and supported by this church. And I really believe that this church is on the forefront of this conversation, certainly locally, but also probably nationally. I think a tremendous amount of courage and bravery has been displayed in this church opening the doors for these kinds of conversations, and it's just so notable. So we're here tonight to sort of set the stage for more conversations, and we're looking forward to the questions that you all have submitted. There's a couple of things that I want to talk about just to lay the foundation for tonight. And the first thing is really, what is mental health? Okay, and there's so many ways to talk about that. Some might say that it's the way we think, we feel, we act and behave. It's how we relate to others. It's how we handle our stress. That's one definition. I heard a pastor, Ryan Casey Waller, once say that mental health is the little voice in my head that's been talking for as long as I can remember, and my mental health is my relationship to that voice. So you know this voice. You know that when you get quiet, this voice might say something like, you're a failure, because of what's happened to you, you're not worthy or lovable. So it's our relationship to that voice that can make up our mental health. I really like to talk about it through the lens of something called shark music. So there's a website called circleofsecurity.org, and they had this little video that they put on YouTube, and when you hit the play button, you would see a pair of feet walking down a sandy path, and there's palm trees on either side, there's beautiful sparkling ocean ahead, and at first, classical music is playing, so your heart rate slows down, your breathing slows down, and you're thinking, gosh, when's my next beach trip? I would love to be there. That's my safe place. So the scene stops and it starts again. And this time it's the same scenery. Sparkling ocean, sandy path, trees. But now the music to Jaws is playing. So you're like, wait a minute, I really had this wrong. This could get bloody. Someone might die. I don't think I want to watch this anymore. Heart rate goes up, breathing goes up. Our mental health is our shark music. What's playing up here colors the way you see everything. So when we say as therapists, you need to do your own work, we're talking about our relationship to the shark music. Now, your shark music may have developed through childhood trauma or a painful situation, but we all have work to do there. Brene Brown has been talking about the definition of overwhelm, and the definition she's using is that when life is unfolding at a rate that is unmanageable to me and my nervous system. That's all of us right now. We can't keep up with the number of new variants and the mandates and what's happening on the stock market. We literally cannot keep up with how fast life is unfolding to us. And many times we begin to feel powerless in that. So there's a window of tolerance we all have. I've talked about this before, but when we're in our window of tolerance, we're functioning well. We can think reasonably. We can be kind and clear. If we fall below our window of tolerance, we are numb and lethargic and tired. If we fall upward out of that window of tolerance, we're anxious and panicked. Stress and trauma shrink the window of tolerance. And all of us have a much smaller window or bandwidth than we've had before. We're also experiencing something called relational poverty. Relational poverty, and it's the lack of deep connections, real, honest conversations with people we can trust. That is more devastating to someone than financial poverty. We all have a fight, flight, freeze response to trauma, so think about how that has applied to our behaviors over the last 2 years. If your automatic response is to fight, maybe you have become an advocate for something. Maybe you found yourself on Twitter posting a lot of things that you believe in.
I know a couple of those people.
Yeah, I think we all do. The freeze response, maybe you've pulled the curtains shut and been so glad when there's a stay-at-home order because you don't want to go out and face the world. And when your boss said it's time to return to the office, you were completely overwhelmed by that idea. The flight response, well, how have we flighted during this time? Maybe it's excessive purchasing and spending, and instead of feeling uncomfortable, I'm filling my Amazon shop cart. Maybe it's day drinking. Okay, so we've all responded in different ways. And the last thing I want to say is that so much of what we're experiencing could lead to post-traumatic stress syndrome. You probably know this term as it relates to veterans, but it's this hypervigilance, I'm having trouble sleeping, I can't relax. That doesn't have to be the case. We can experience post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic wisdom. We can come out of this better. We can reevaluate our relationships and our priorities. But guess what? It doesn't just happen because you've been through something hard. You don't get to go through something hard and automatically be stronger and wiser. Post-traumatic growth and wisdom happen when you pause to reflect, to find meaning. Without the pause, we don't get better. So I think a tremendous thing that we can do in this season of hardship is slow down enough to reflect, to find meaning, and to have really healthy, rich conversations.
Okay. My name is Pike Williams, and this is a second career for me. I retired in 2012 from the Procter & Gamble company and did my internship at the Refuge Center for Counseling, and I have learned so much, and so much I wish I would have known raising 3 now adult children. And so all I would say to those of you who feel like you hear something tonight that you wish you would have known, just know that you're not alone in that. We're all learning, and today's a good day to start doing something different if you hear something that you want to do that with. I also want to thank Matt and the church here for having us. It's really great. And Matt said something I think really important about the Holy Spirit's presence here tonight. And I hope everyone feels that. And I hope that you hear from the Lord just the way you need to hear from Him. There's a quote by, I don't know that this was original with Carl Jung, but this has sort of been one of my favorite quotes this year. But he basically said, bidden or unbidden, God is present. And we think of that often in the clinical counseling room when we close the door, and ethically we are not able to just put our beliefs out there directly and in any way influence or guide the client in some way to what they, quote, should believe or not. But knowing that the Lord is there just makes all the difference for me and many others who are doing this work. And so here tonight, He's here, and I just want all of us to know that. And the fact that you're here is awesome, because one of the things Jenny said last year, she made a comment along the way that said, be the change that you are hoping for. And your presence here says essentially that everything in my life or with people I love is not okay. So I may see you on Sunday, and if you ask me how I'm doing, rather than say, hey, everything's wonderful, just slow down a little bit and say, I've been better, or I'm okay, but not everything is okay. Something that's truthful, but you don't have to tell everyone everything. So we're all learning to live in the truth It's a big deal. It's easy to sit here and say it. I want to speak the truth. We're encouraged by the Apostle Paul to speak the truth in love. So speaking the truth in love, especially now, is difficult for all of us. But thankfully, by the grace of God, we can do that. And he hasn't gone anywhere. And in fact, when I was in the second grade, public school, we started every day reciting the 100th Psalm. And I managed to get that thing memorized by the end of the year. But the last part of it, it closes with, the Lord is good, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endures to all generations. It's a big deal, okay? The Lord is good. With the circumstances we have, wow, I don't know about that. His mercy is everlasting, really? Wars and rumors of wars, it's happening. And then his truth. A lot of people are challenging that, right? I don't have to explain to you. We and our children are being bombarded daily with challenges to what we would consider truth. Because why do we believe that? Because it's in the Bible. Okay, and we as believers, for those of you who are believers and followers of Jesus Christ, who I think most of you are for sure, we have a reason to believe that there are some absolute truths here that we are leaning into, especially during a difficult time like this. One other thing I just want to say that just to maybe ground us a little bit, one of the things I have found so very helpful at this stage of my life, and spent the vast majority of my life not knowing this, has to do with the value of emotions. I was an engineer by education. I was worked at Procter & Gamble's a corporate world. Generally, emotions are not understood or welcome in that environment, much like many of your environments. If you play sports, if you're in business, and maybe within our families of origin, which would include mine, people didn't know what to do with emotions, so we didn't do anything with them. But they didn't go anywhere is the problem. And so one of the things I have learned and am learning with all of you is the importance and the value of these things. And we often use the metaphor of lights on a dashboard. So if we're driving down the road, none of us wants the light to come on, of course, but it comes on. And what do we need to do? We can ignore it like my daughter did once. She put a picture over it because later she told me it bothered her. And we paid the price for it. I paid the price for it. New engine later, we had to talk to her about those lights. But when our light comes on, we need to pull over somewhere safe, raise the hood, or have somebody who knows what it looks like under there, and take a look and see what's going on, and then to care for that, right? And in the same way, learning to recognize our emotions as just of lights that are there to help us, even though they're not altogether pleasant, they're very necessary. They're given to us by the Lord God to guide us to something that's really important. And so there's so much in Scripture about these emotions. And it's not to say we shouldn't feel these emotions. So when we hear a scripture like don't be anxious, it doesn't mean you should never be anxious. It says basically when you are anxious, okay, pray. Let your request be made known to God. So there's this whole idea that we're going to have these lights coming on. And honestly, many of our dashboards feel all lit up. It's like every light on there. And that's just the nature of our situation right now. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about emotions and how they can help us a little bit later if it's appropriate. But that's all I'll say for now. Thanks again for having us, Matt, and thank you all for being here. It's really great. And you all are being the change that we're looking for. So thanks for your presence here.
Yeah, thank you, Pike. And I definitely want to come back to some of what you just shared in a few moments. But Jenny, I want to ask you, you said that we have less resources today than we did 10 years ago. What do you mean by that?
How many of you are tired? How many of you are hungry? How many of you have had all the vacation you need? How many of you have issues with your kids or your family or your friends that you have no idea how to help with? How many of you get calls or texts from these people regularly? How many of you feel like there are problems in the world that you can do nothing about? How many of you have gotten to the point where you don't care about the problems in the world? I would say one of the this is kind of my thing, so I'll start it now. We all have the world in our pockets now, and we don't ever get a break from all of the good things, all of the bad things, all of the everything that's happening all over the world and in everyone else's life. How many of you all feel 24/7 available? Only one person? Wow. My my uncle was an ER doctor when I was growing up, and for 1 week out of the month, it might have even been like 3 months, he worked 24/7. And he would literally sleep for 2 or 3 weeks of the other times that he was off. So you used to have to be really important to be available 24/7. And now we have this, I'm so amused that only one person raised their hand, because
That's a little bit like when you go to your physician and they ask you questions like, have you ever smoked? Never, ever. Do you ever drink alcohol? Socially, very occasionally. Like, this isn't how I answer. We had a recent conversation on staff about the unreliable narrator sometimes when we answer questions.
I think I maybe want to stop for a minute that y'all didn't raise your hand, because I think that speaks to the normalcy of it. Like, how close is your phone to you? How often do you turn it off? How many times do you respond as soon as you get a text? How often do you check your email? How there's a level of being on that I don't even think we would think to name anymore, because it's so normal. We don't know what it's done to our nervous systems. And it has replaced, our relationships with our devices, which was just solidified for all of us since the pandemic, is that it's our connection to those we love, right? It's our connection to answers. It's our connection to directions of how we're supposed to live today, and what we're allowed to say and not say, and where we're allowed to go or not go. And when you what's happened is that connection has become a symbol to all good things about humanity and all bad things about humanity. But in its essence, it's our number one way of staying connected to each other and connected to ourselves. So we have this, I don't know what to call it, a symbol, a metaphor. It's a thing. It's a thing that represents so much. Like, I talk a lot that this really started after September 11th, when the people who had cell phones, got to talk to their loved ones for the last time. The people who had cell phones got to find their loved ones, right? So it has this deep human connection to it that for us has just gotten deeper during the pandemic, when we could FaceTime those we loved and we couldn't see them in person. Well, it does, right? It gives us a form of connection, right? We could possibly see someone on FaceTime, Zoom. We can also hear their voices if we're one of the old-fashioned people who talks on the phone. But we weren't made for that to exclusively be our human connection. So you are a body. You're a body. And right now, even, which can both feel like a overwhelming thing and also a really wonderful thing, but it matters to your body that there are other humans around you that you're having a cellular connection and attunement to. You are getting to see people's look at you in the eyes, particularly. I'm not just looking at a screen, I'm looking at you. You're seen. You're seen. And we need that. We never, ever, ever stop needing that. So I don't even remember your question now, but I'll say that's what we're missing. We're missing eye contact. We're missing this experience that it matters that I'm just alive. Not that I posted the right picture or had the interesting thing to say or got the like. It just matters that I'm sitting here in front of you. Very similar to how it is with a baby. A baby doesn't really care who you are. They just care that you're interacting with it. Each of us has that little tiny baby living inside of us all the time. And there are all these ways those needs were being met that have gotten eliminated because we have figured out a way to become more efficient and not have to show up. And they do help us make our life easier. But once we start going a certain amount of years without that relational, what'd you call it? That relational poverty is a very physical experience. It is not just an emotional connection that we're talking about.
Well, let's go right with that. If I'll kind of tentatively throw this to Amy, but any of you can speak to this. That idea of the relational poverty. I was taking notes as you were talking, Amy, and I caught the phrase, but I kind of want to go back to that. Talk a little bit more about what is relational poverty and how is that impacting us?
So this is Bruce Perry's term, emotional poverty, he calls it. And Bruce Perry, if you're familiar with his work, he's extraordinary. He wrote The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and he just co-authored a book with Oprah called What Happened to You. But it is this awareness that we are hardwired for connection. It's how God designed our bodies, our hearts and our spirits. It's the neurobiology of how we were designed. And we need people more than we need any other resource. And, 20 months of Zoom and working from our closets or our bathrooms or wherever we can find to work, and we've gotten out of the habit of being connected. Someone called it social atrophy. Social atrophy we're experiencing. And so now it's a little bit awkward to re-enter, and we're not sure, hug, handshake, proximity is 6 feet. So we're having to work our way through the awkwardness of that right now.
Well, so we actually got quite a few questions submitted, and I haven't checked Slido yet, but ahead of time we got quite a few questions kind of around navigating conflict with different people, and as a follow-up, I may ask some more specific questions than how I'm saying it here, but when you said we have this social atrophy and we're relearning how to relate with people, I am curious, could that potentially contribute? It's truly a question, I don't mean it to be so leading, but I think a lot of people over the last year or so have been dealing with greater conflict with people in their relational spheres. We're seeing it here at the church, and I'm aware in my own friendships and people I work with. I wonder if there's a connection there of we did so little embodied interacting for a season, our social skills atrophy, and is it possible that's why some things are so nasty? I don't know. I'm having a couple things in mind, but maybe if you could even any of you could speak to, in your work, what you're seeing with people who are in a lot of conflict, and speak to that a little bit, Pike?
Yeah. So, picking up on the idea of that was mentioned before, when we experience a physical threat or an emotional threat, someone enters the room that we've had unpleasant interactions with, or someone, I feel that it's dangerous to be with them. Anytime, or there's a snake on the trail that I'm hiking on, anything like that where we feel threatened, our body is going to respond to that, as we talked about, as Amy mentioned, fight or flight or freeze. And as I think also was mentioned before, we often feel shame about the fact that my body is responding that way. Why am I afraid of that? Or I shouldn't be afraid. And the reality is our physiology here is just how we're made. And the way we're made is just that when we feel threatened for any reason, the limbic part of our brain comes to life. And it activates a couple of hormones that come, and all this happens lightning fast, that ultimately turn on the adrenaline, and we become fight or flight or freeze. And the interesting thing about this, it's not on or off, it's like a real stat. I'm 10% there, or 20% there, or I'm 50% there. And let's face it, many of us, we could say, are walking around with my adrenaline on most of the time, and it can be pretty high. And if it wasn't high, just turn on the television or jump on social media or check the news feeds, and it'll be there. Okay? And so fear is the emotion that I see so often right now with the people that I see, and it's present at the Williams household, that's for sure. Fear of what? And there's so many things that I could be afraid of. Fear for my children, fear that things are not going to work out, fear that things are not going to get back to normal, fear that I'm going to miss the wedding because of COVID protocols, or fear that I couldn't be there for the funeral, or fear that, goodness knows, someone I love is sick. Will they make it? Fear after fear, will I lose my job? Or how will I recover from the business that I couldn't make it in? And a lot of fear out there, and fear is the fastest of all the emotions for our good health, right? Our emotions are there to move us. That's what the word means, to move us, literally, not just emotionally, but also physically. Move. Something is happening. The red light is on. Respond, and it all happens really fast. And so I don't know, Matt, to some degree, I would just want to offer that some of the conflict we're having is because frequently we are operating from a space where our adrenaline is pretty high. I'm feeling, and how do we act when it's on? We feel hypervigilant. If you say one more thing about going on another vacation and I'm already feeling financial stress, I'm going to lose it, or I may be feeling like I'm very defensive, or I'm just feeling like I just want to escape. I just need to get away. And so a lot of the conflict that we're having, that's part of it, I think. I think it's a significant part of it. Part of it is that we're all together, for good or ill. We're together, right? So many people working from home. Children are not in school, they're with us. We're trying to have Zoom calls, and the children are crying, and I don't have to explain to you, you know what that's like. And so we're constantly in a state of fear that I'm not going to get all this done. And so I think for really good reasons, let's be fair to ourselves, that yes, we've had a lot of conflict. Now the goal becomes, what can I do to manage that stress level and to bring that down so that the adrenaline comes down and what we call the parasympathetic system comes back online, which is where we can rest, and it's where we can eat and digest our food properly, and it's where the sexual apparatus comes back online. And so there's this inverse relationship between these two systems. When my adrenaline is on, these other systems are offline because the blood is flowing to the muscles. I'm ready to fight or flight. When I'm calm, okay, I'm hungry. Okay, and this is a normal thing. And so it points back to the need for adequate resourcing. And all we mean by resourcing are just some of the things that we were just talking about. I need a close friend to call right now. I have not had quiet time with the Lord, if that's meaningful to you right now. I need to be honest about something. And speaking the truth is a huge, huge part of this. And I'll just close with this. Having a vocabulary to speak the truth, and I'm going to put a plug in here for emotions, for us to know, what am I feeling? I'm feeling sad, and I'm angry that I feel sad. This shouldn't be happening. That would be some anger. I'm real angry about that. That's fair. It's fair to be angry. Anger's not bad. If we're throwing stuff, that's bad. But that's rage, actually. But anger is, this shouldn't be like this. That's just anger. It's not fair, right? And so, but I feel hurt. So the ability to know what I'm feeling, that's the first challenge. And then can I say it out loud to somebody that's safe? And finding someone safe who's not going to try to fix it or quote a verse to me or something,
Well, let's stay there for a moment, because I think what you were just saying there, Pike, being able to name it and say it out loud, say it to a safe person. What are other practical things we can do to come back down, right? So the adrenaline's pumping. Some people are sitting here thinking, oh, yeah, that has happened to me. I've been quite angry, and it's not been great. What are some practical things we do to can do to bring us back into balance?
Yeah, so there's a book that all therapists love called The Body Keeps the Score. Let me see a nod of anybody who's familiar with this resource. Bessel van der Kolk. So he talks about the fact that immobility is at the root of trauma. So whatever was happening, I needed to fight, I needed to flee, and my body didn't do that. So now I have the trauma, the thing that happened to me, and I'm mad at my body for not helping me when I needed that. So we look at any form of movement as progress or healing. So I'm a tremendous proponent of radical adventure, and I've been talking about that a lot this year. Of course, that could just mean for you getting out on the Duck River and kayaking. It might mean a 3-mile run after work to kind of shake off the stress of the day. But for me, it's getting out in places in nature that make me feel very, very small. Places that remind me there is a whole lot way bigger than me. And it's not all on my shoulders. It's not all my responsibility to fix this. And there is majesty and power all around me. I remember back in September, I do some really complex trauma work with my clients. And I remember I had a new client who'd been through something horrific. And I remember that weekend telling my husband, I need you to pack a suitcase because I need to go stand in front of Niagara Falls. So we did that. So I went, got on the little boat in front of Niagara Falls. I needed something that big to remind me of my smallness and the fact that I don't need to have all the answers. So movement, adventure, being outside.
That's great.
It's important that everyone knows that media is absolutely fueled by conflict. That is how it makes its money. That's how it keeps your attention. And that's big media. You know, if you're just watching normal TV in the news or in your small feed. One of my good friends, who's also, he and I are co-writing a book, he was on LinkedIn, which is one of the least controversial social media platforms that exists. Thank you. It was. And he, as an experiment, posted something like I guess LinkedIn started, it was all about business and people started posting more personal things. And so my friend just posted some little thing of, let's let LinkedIn get back to being a business platform. And I don't know, if I were Amy, I would actually know these statistics. But it was like a matter of 10 hours. It was just like, I mean, it had lit up, including 100 employees of LinkedIn having chimed in and followed up on this. I mean, it got so hateful so fast, including people saying things like, I mean, awful. It was just awful. I can't even say any of them because it's just more conflict. In response to every single one, he responded to every comment. He would post the rules about LinkedIn that say, LinkedIn is for professional purposes, not for personal purposes. And that's it. It created so much energy and there was there was no conflict, right? This was not even, go find your conflict somewhere else. There's a billion other places to have it. But the more time that we are spending time in this environment, and unfortunately it doesn't matter if you're spending the time in the environment or not, because so much of the culture is, we are getting into this mode of what's called the binary system. Like, you have to be a 1 or a 0. You have to be for it or against it. There are no nuances. There's no a little bit of this or a little bit of that. And when we were all isolated, and in our isolation, we in our human ways that we do are like, you know how I can be safe? I can be this, and I cannot be that. So there is no this or that in real life. So on a very practical level, and I am extreme and also a very emotionally and environmentally sensitive person, I cannot be on social media. I cannot see what my friends or family believe or think in that context. If I see it, I don't like them. And if they see me, they don't like me. No one. And when I have the capacity now, I had someone move into my neighborhood who I had zero experience of this man outside of my face-to-face connection with him. I will not go into the details of what defines this character and how if I followed him on Facebook, I would never walk out of my house to see him, ever. And he's one of my favorite people I met in 2021. So my number one practical tool is stop looking at what people are saying and posting and let people in your face-to-face get to experience them there, because none of that is real. none of it is real. Everybody is so scared and trying to do what they believe is right and trying to belong in whatever way they can, that they're presenting this image, which is the ultimate image, out to the world in hopes that they will be safe and belong. And there are a few people they will be safe and belong with because of what they have posted. But they won't feel safe or like they belong. So that's my number one practical.
Let's stay there for a moment if we can. And I don't think I shared this earlier, but every year for a few years now, we encourage our church to begin the new calendar year with fasting for 21 days. And of course, people participate in different ways. But we do encourage people, if they're able, physically, to consider a solid food fast or some alteration of that, and then, spiritual practice of abstaining. Real quick show of hands, how many of you participated in the fast at some way, even if it wasn't, okay. So a lot of the room, all right. How many of you incorporated some type of abstaining from social media or technology as part of your fasting? Okay, so certainly not the whole room, but a lot of us, and I did myself. I'm kind of just curious to those of us who just had our hands up, we don't have the time to go around, but I'm guessing you noticed a difference at some level, right? I know I did myself. A few years ago, someone encouraged me to just consider, I just intermittently will take certain apps off my phone. And I did that with the 21 days. I know more of us did. It's so interesting to me, then I just want to throw it back to you in a moment, Jenny, but just something that's on my mind a lot. There aren't a lot of things that we know we know it's bad for us, and yet we keep going back. And I think I've heard other people use this illustration a little bit before, but and I'll just say, and then I want to hear, just go for a few minutes, Jenny, after this. But, I wonder, I don't know when this will be. I don't know if it'll be in 5 years or 25 years, but will we as a society look at, the frequency with which we use social media now, a little bit like we look at cigarette smoking from some time ago? And if this is what I mean, and then you just make it sound smarter, Jenny. But for a long time, decades, the science was there that cigarette smoking was bad for you. And it was just still kind of normal. It was very socially acceptable, and it was you knew it, right? Everyone knew it, but you're just well, yeah, but of course we're going to smoke, we're on an airplane, right? And then almost, every part of the world is a little different, but it almost overnight was just as a society, we were no, yeah, it's bad for you. And there will always be people who smoke. It's not like it's going to be eradicated completely, but this is a quick anecdote. When I lived here, growing up, and then in 2007, I moved to Las Vegas, and I believe it was 2007 or 2008 that Tennessee changed its smoking laws, because I remember going into restaurants and smoking or not, and then I came back to visit my parents, and it was, 21 and over. Ironically, I was living in Vegas, where people will be smoking forever. But I'm just we know now, right? We know that social media makes you more anxious. We know that it's bad for you. At some point, we're all going to get off, maybe, but I don't know. Just do what you want with it, Jenny. I should say I definitely still have social media accounts, so it's not like I've quit, but...
I think that what social media has done, the primary platforms that most of us use and connect through, it would be the only restaurant in town is McDonald's. So if you want to leave your house, you want to go out to eat, you want to see friends, you have to go to McDonald's. That's the only McDonald's. You want to have business contacts, well, you got to eat at McDonald's, right? So, and you're hungry, and there's food at McDonald's, and it fills you up. So you get to see people, you get some food in your system. Sometimes it tastes good. Let's pretend McDonald's always tastes good for this metaphor. And there is no other restaurant. And everyone's talking about McDonald's all the time. I have no idea where this is going. This might not even work. But that's, and then everyone forgets. They forget there's a grocery store. They forget there's locally owned places. They forget that there's such a thing as other kinds of marketing to do. There is like this massive, because guess what? McDonald's freaking owns everything. And McDonald's has convinced not just all of America, but all of the whole freaking world that it's the only place that will ever feed you. The only place. And you believe it. You believe it. And then you get so used to eating that food. You get so used to it that your body starts to adapt, and it forgets that you used to eat meals and be full and your stomach not hurt afterwards. You don't even remember that that was humanly possible. I mean, when I talk to people under the age of 25, they say, I would give anything to get off of social media. I would give anything to not have a smartphone anymore. If everyone my age was legally required to get rid of it, I would live the best life I could possibly imagine. They hate it. It is a responsibility. It is a burden. It's exhausting. They know they can never live up to the standards. They know if you post this today and you don't post it tomorrow, you're out. It is a terrible, terrible, terrible world to live in. But it's the only place they can find each other. It's the only place they can find the rules. And that is so on us, the adults, for having stopped creating a better world for them. And for us having hidden in our phones. But, okay, now I got off on my tangent.
Well, it's good. Let's say this for a couple more minutes and then do that exercise that we talked about. So is what you were just talking about, is that what media trauma is? I'd love to just kind of bring in that term and
It's that we're actually suffering traumatic incidents from things that are happening through our phones that aren't even happening to us. So some of the first research that came out on this was the Boston Marathon shooting that bombing. Thank you. It gets so confusing these days. And the people who watched the bombing on their phone were more traumatized than the people who were there on the ground. And it's for exactly what Amy just said, which is that when you're watching, guess what? Number one, you weren't made to handle it. Your body did not create any of the chemicals or engagement, did not have any of the resources for solving the problem that the emergency brought. Guess where you were? You were sitting still on your couch, more than likely alone, which all by itself, to have a traumatic incident that happens when you are alone and you have no physical ability to respond to it, creates the experience of trauma. So now take that to every single thing that you can imagine that we've seen and our kids have seen and that we hear about, and we're sitting there still and alone. But that is suffering media trauma, and it didn't happen to us. It didn't even happen to anyone we knew or loved, and yet we are traumatized by it.
That's so rich. It's tough to facilitate sometimes when you say stuff like that, because I'm like, truly. I do have a follow-up question, but Amy Pike, anything you want to add before I follow up?
Just real quick, your question about what can people do when they notice their adrenaline is stirred up, whether it's vicarious trauma or any number of things. I think, as Amy said, movement, deep breathing. Many of you have done that. You may know the benefits of that. It's diaphragmatic breathing, so simply stomach breathing is what I call it. So when you inhale, let your stomach relax and do that slowly, and just make sure you have a good full breathing cycle, a good exhale. Essentially what happens there, I remember thinking, this sounds weird, breathing. But physically what's happening is when we relax, our diaphragm physically comes in contact with a vagal nerve that runs up to our brain, and it sends a signal to the brain that everything's okay, that you can turn the adrenaline off. And so there's a physical connection between that and just telling our brain we're calm. So deep breathing, hydration is so important. It helps dilute the presence of adrenaline in our bodies. So if you're not well hydrated, work on that. And the apps. So if you're getting rid of apps, that's great, but take on one or two. There's an app called Headspace. Some of you may know it. There's one called Aura, A-U-R-A. There's one called Calm, and Calm, C-A-L-M, and all of these are helpful at slowing you down, talking you through some things that you can do at home privately that will help you calm down. And if you and your spouse need to have a hard conversation, or you and one of your children need to have a hard conversation, think of a timeout, or let's say it this way, is this the right time? Let's always ask that question. Can we talk about where we're going to spend Christmas sometime in the next few days when you're ready, when I'm ready, or our finances, or where we're going to send our child to college, or just any number of difficult conversations, but right time, right place. And then the use of a timeout whenever things are going bad. So when we feel ourselves coming up, and that's really important to do, to notice when our adrenaline is on and how we feel physically. We all know that feeling, and so if we can recognize it and say, I need a timeout. In couples, often there's a pursuer and a withdrawer dynamic. One of us wants to get it resolved right now. The withdrawer is like, woof, let me get out of here. I got to think about this. And of course, it's almost like a magnet that's repelling. Come here, I want to talk to you. I can't. Come here, you know. And so what do we need? We just need to take a time out. We do need to have a time in. So we're not going to just kick the can down the road and forget about it. Can't do that. But the withdrawer needs time to calm down. And so does the pursuer often. And so we're just looking for, take a time out, but always have a time in. Those are just some things that we can try to do practically.
Just to affirm that very last point about the withdrawer affirmer, earlier in our marriage, my wife and I were seeing a marriage counselor who shared that concept, and I said that was massive, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, but I know we have a lot of married couples here. I think it's so important, that specifically, if you can identify that dynamic in your relationship and then give permission to name it, right?
Talk about it as a couple.
Yeah.
And it's normal, yeah.
So, Jenny, you were talking a moment ago about social media, and Pike, when you talked earlier about emotions being like a dashboard, it made me think about in John 7, when Jesus said, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me, and he'll have rivers of living water flowing through him, right? This idea that if we are, the thirst of our soul are an invitation to move toward Jesus, where he can satisfy us. So I think of, like these sadness and fear, these are gifts to invite us to Jesus. And if, sometimes when you're a kid and you're thirsty and you like want Coke because it tastes good for a few minutes, but it's actually further dehydrating you. Like, I think that is what social media sometimes does to us. Like, so even connecting some of the different things we're talking about, like, as Pike was talking, hopefully some of you are thinking, like, yeah, you know what, I actually think I can name, I have been fearful about this, or I can name, this thing has made me sad. I think for some of us, if we're not careful, our instinct then is to then go and get that hit from Instagram, or go and get that hit from Facebook, and it may, it's like Coke for our soul a little bit. It may feel good initially, but, and you've got the research, Jenny, to speak well to this, like it is actually bad for us. It's draining, it's dehydrating. I'd love to kind of move to this kind of discussion exercise that we talked about ahead of time, but anything else you'd want to say before we move toward it?
Yeah, McDonald's makes a lot more money when the people who are in line fight with each other.
Yeah.
That's an important thing to know.
Yeah. I may come back to that in a moment, but I want you to just, this is what we're gonna do. Now, this will be brief, and I'm gonna let Jenny and Amy tee it up, and then after we do this exercise, I think we'll take a short break and then come to some more questions. But we talked ahead of time about like being present tonight, and
that it matters that you're here.
And it matters, like we're a body. It said that up front, so we're gonna practice it a little bit.
Okay, so you're going to pair up with somebody at your table. If you have an odd number, turn and look at a table that might have an extra. So they don't have to be at your table, but the best idea is that you have a pair with someone. And this exercise is only going to last 2 minutes. It's just 2 minutes.
We can do it, guys.
2 minutes, 120 seconds. And it is primarily a listening exercise, okay? So when we listen to someone, we listen with our ears, but what else do we listen with? Our eyes, our body, right? So the practice is for the listener. The listener is going to attentively listen for 60 seconds, while the other person, however they choose, how much of these 60 seconds they choose to take up, is going to say 3 things about themselves. Introduce themselves if you've known each other forever. Maybe there are 3 things that other person doesn't know. 3 things you want someone else to know about you. So imagine if you're filling in your little bio and Instagram, I like this, I'm good at this, I did this when I was a child. We're not going into like any deep soul work right now. And you're going to listen. And at the end of that minute, Matt will alert you, and you will switch, and you will do the opposite. Got it? Everybody got it? Anybody unclear on these instructions?
I just want you to know, Jenny, that I am using my phone for a timer.
Okay,
I'm
good to know.
not checking Facebook. So, just take a moment. All right. I'm going to go ahead and start the timer quickly. I realize some of you who like to be excellent at things are like, I want the best partner. I got to think about what I'm going to say, but we're going to keep it moving. So your first minute starts in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Begin.
It's great. It's really.
Five seconds. And stop. Stop, stop, stop. Everybody stop.
And switch.
Go. All right, 5 seconds. And stop. All right, so if I can just get your attention. Jenny.
Okay, could I have hear from just a couple of people what that was like for you? Somebody raise their hand. There we go, you. Can you say a little bit more about it? Okay, so she's saying hers was with her mother-in-law, and you got to hear about some things that were actually going on with your mother-in-law that wouldn't have come up with. Oh wow. Okay, that's beautiful. She got to hear her vision of herself, as opposed to just making assumptions about how you see yourself, right, or how I see you. Anybody else? You wanted to interject about 3 times. So 60 seconds. So what'd you learn about yourself in 60 seconds? My wife is right. My wife is right. Oh my gosh. So it's yeah, this is it's official. You've said it now. And you think that means you're going to lose, but you just won if she hears that. So I did this exercise with a group of people of a lot of ages, but half of them were girls who were very active on social media. The other half were a variety of different ages, sexes, and had various interactions with social media. The entire group of people almost cried after those 120 seconds. It was actually January of 2020, so this was pre-pandemic when we were a lot more resourced as humans. People said, I haven't felt peace like that in a really long time, just hearing someone talk. But what was the most fascinating to me was the girls' responses. They said they're not used to anyone ever listening to them, ever. And they did not know what to do with someone giving them that much attention. So again, the number one resource currently right now in our society is attention. That's what social media platforms are fed with, is our attention, the attention we give them. And that's why we're on them, to get attention and to give attention. And in 60 seconds, these girls, everyone in the room, but these girls had more attention than they had given in all of the hours that they had been on social media looking for attention and trying to give attention, and none of it touched what that 60 seconds gave them. Even more significant to me was that they were terrified. They said they had never felt that level of vulnerability. And they were not saying anything deeply personal. Can anyone guess why? It wasn't edited. It wasn't edited. They couldn't go over it and see. They couldn't make sure they were coming across the way that they came across. They couldn't make sure they were being seen in the right angle. So social anxiety is kind of sweeping the nation. And I really believe this is one thing we need to be paying attention to, is that we have stopped learning how to be vulnerable, awkward, whatever we are in front of someone else, because we're used to controlling and editing it. And our precious souls and minds and bodies are suffering deep, deep, deep loss because of that.
So we are going to take a short break, probably just roughly 5 minutes, and then we'll get back in here and still got some great stuff to touch on, and we'll get into some of the questions you guys have submitted on Slido as well. So 5 to 7 minute break. Thank you. All right. Hey, we're going to get started here in just a moment. If you want to go ahead, grab your seat, wrap up conversations. Thank you guys so much for just sticking with us. I know this could feel like drinking from a fire hydrant in some moments, but we, as a church, we are so blessed to have Jenny and Amy and Pike with us tonight, and I just want to kind of keep diving in and get as much out of our time together as we can. So there's a couple more questions and topics that we've kind of prepared to discuss that I want to start with, and then in a few minutes we're going to throw a Slido on the screen and take some very specific questions from some of you, and then we will end, just so you know, we're going to end tonight with some really specific next steps that we have coming up here at the church that we want to invite you to participate in. Amy, I've had the privilege of hearing you speak on a couple occasions over the last year or so. And last year, you said, we have all lost something this year. That was a year ago. And I think sometimes when some of us hear the idea of losing something, we particularly think of death, right? Like if we have lost someone we love, and that's certainly true for a number of people here in this room. But loss doesn't always mean death. I'm wondering if you can see, or if you can speak to how you're seeing loss impact the people you work with.
You're right. A lot of times when we think about loss, we think about the death of someone we care about. We actually know that there's over 52 forms of loss, and it could be the loss of a job or a career, the loss of an investment account, a pet, a marriage. And so there's a lot of kinds of losses. We always say, what's the worst loss? It's yours. It's yours. Because for you, it's been so significant. We also say that grief is as unique as your fingerprint. So the things that you're going to need, the emotions you're having, are totally distinctive to your experiences. One of the things I like to share as it relates to grief and traumatic bereavement, I just think maybe this will be helpful to someone out there, is if you think about grief and loss as a river. Say you own your own little acre of land and you've experienced a significant loss, and now there's this river in your backyard. And the truth is that river is never going away. You lost something really important to you, and you will always miss that. When we're meeting with clients, what we're looking for is the river moving? And movement means I'm not moving on, but I'm moving forward. I'm moving forward with more love than pain. Moving forward with more love than pain. And there's this whole theory around something called continuing bonds, which means I'm continuing to have some form of relationship with the thing or person I've lost. As a therapist, what we're listening for is whether that river has been dammed up by a bunch of beaver sticks. So if you think of how beavers dam up a space and the river won't flow, and many times what you find is that there was something really traumatic that happened at the end. So maybe it's that I never got to say goodbye. Or maybe it's I did say goodbye and it didn't go well. There were all these things I wanted to say, and it's happened so suddenly. I never got to say those things. It was the last look on someone's face. I mean, some of you who have cared for someone who's ill or an aging parent, the end is hard. And there's some trauma around those last images, sight, sound, smells. And so what we're listening for is those sticks that are preventing the river from moving. And the sticks are preventing us from accessing positive memories. So now every time we think about the person, all we can think about is the ugliness of the end. And we can't even recall all the positive things. So the trauma therapy that we do removes those sticks so the river can keep flowing again. And some days it's going to flow and it's going to be rushing and the sun is shining down and the water's sparkling. It's going to feel okay. And other days it's barely a muddy trickle, but it's moving. You know, we do grief and loss retreats every 6 months at the Refuge Center, and we host them now at the Little White House here on this campus. And we use fire and letter writing and art to help people talk about what they've been through. A lot of times people want to know, where was God when this thing happened? right? The thing that happened was awful, but also my question is, where was God in all of this? I'll just also say, some people go, I don't know, am I grieving? People ask me all the time, am I grieving? I don't know if I'm grieving. How do I know? Here's one practical thing to think about. If you were in a relationship with your grief, how would you describe it? So some people say, well, I feel like it's chasing me from behind, and if I turn around and look at it, it's going to tackle me, and I won't be able to get back up again. Or I feel like it's this toddler yanking at my pants saying, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. And I'm like, I got things to do. So when we do parent-child training, we teach, have 15 minutes of floor time a day with your child. Well, what is that? Floor time is when you get on the ground and you're not trying to parent. You are just saying, oh my goodness, look at that truck, it's going so fast. You're not trying to teach anything, you're just paying attention, you're just in rhythm with your kid. So with grief, I encourage people to give 15 minutes of floor time a day to your grief. Maybe that's writing a letter to the person you miss. Maybe it's just journaling. Today feels horrible. It feels like the sun will never come out again. But if you give 15 minutes of floor time a day to your grief, it won't chase you all day long. It'll feel like, oh, you haven't forgotten. You're still paying attention. So just a few thoughts.
That's so good. Jenny, Pike, anything you'd want to add to the topic of grief?
Yeah, I would just add to that, which is really great. Many of you are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, right? The denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally acceptance. And she's quick to say that those are not linear, so we don't do all of one and then we do the other one. It's much more like, instead of a line, these things are connected like a bracelet or something. So we're going to circle around many times over, and that's very normal and it's understandable. Frequently people feel shame because quote unquote, I should be over this by now. And we'll never get over a loss that's serious. We'll adapt, but we won't ever get over it. And every anniversary, every September 17th is my mother's birthday. She's gone. She's been gone for a long time, but I think about her, right? And so if you catch me on that day and you ask me how I'm doing, I might say I'm a little sad today. I'm thinking about my mom. But September 18th, I'll be fine, okay? And I'll be fine on September 17th too. It's just, I'll be a little sad, okay? And so I think just know that whatever stage you're in, it's okay, and realize visiting those stations of grief is repeatedly is okay. There's, like Amy said so well, there's no right way to grieve. Everybody's is unique, so it's good.
If I could just add to that really quickly, yeah. In connection to what Pike just said, acceptance doesn't mean I'm okay with it. Acceptance means that I accept this thing has happened and that I will find a way to move forward. However, those were the 5 stages we heard about forever. David Kessler, who worked with Kubler-Ross and developed the 5 stages, he recently, I think really within the past year, he went back to the Kubler-Ross Foundation and said, I lost my son. He had a son that overdosed in his 20s, and now he's no longer the grief expert. He's the grieving father. So he goes back to the foundation and he says, I worked my way through all these stages. I reached acceptance, and I was kind of devastated to think that that was the end. Like, there's got to be something else. So he recently wrote a book, and this was accepted as now the 6th stage of grief, and it's called Finding Meaning. And so we go past accepting that it's happened and I'll still somehow live. We now go into, how do I make meaning? How do I create a legacy in honor of the person that I cared so much about? And maybe it's this 5K I start, or a charity I donate to, or a tree I plant in my backyard, or maybe it's just that I drink out of their coffee cup every day and think of them, or I wear a piece of their jewelry. But finding meaning so that the memory moves forward.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
One of the human resources that we're deeply, deeply bankrupt to as a society right now is empathy. So your empathy is one of your human resources. You were given it as like on a biological level because the actual experience of empathy is how you knew how to help your circle of people. So it's the reason when we watch something physically, happen to somebody else, somebody gets poked in the eye, all of us have this like reaction. So we were made with that reaction because we have a responsibility to the people in our vicinity to help them, that their pain is our pain. Does that make sense? So we are given a certain amount of empathy, like as in a bank account in our emotional being. And we are given the amount that we humanly possible can follow up that feeling with some sort of action that would benefit ourselves or someone else. So that's how much we have. So there is an actual real number for this, and it's pretty low. I want to say it's like 40 people that you could handle hearing what's going on in their life, have a emotional response to it, so that would move you to call them and check on them, make a meal for them, give a hug to them, right? Because what we're doing is we're comforting ourselves. This is this ability that God's put in us to comfort someone else because it hurts us what happened to them. So you all can imagine, now that we have access to every single difficult or hard thing, what happens is we start tripping over into this place of we literally run out of empathy. We don't have any more. It's not that we have hard hearts. It's not that we're not brave, we're not kind, we don't care. We ran out of gas, just like your car runs out of gas because it's gone so many miles. And as they were talking about grief, I thought, you cannot, if you're out of empathy, right, for the tragedies that are happening in the world, what are the chances that you're going to have empathy for your really hard day? Right? I mean, how many people have had that, like, what right do I have to grieve when so-and-so's going through this and so-and-so's going through that? So a practical, again, another just very self-protective practical reason to stay off of the media and to not be following every single person and everything that's going on in their life is literally for the benefit of society to pull back, to build up your own resources of empathy. Because all of you know, empathy is not real. If you don't have empathy for yourself, you have no empathy to give to somebody else. It's actually what you're doing. So just want to speak to that.
That's great. Just quickly on that, we actually, in a staff training this last year, Darren and another pastor talked to us about some of the limits of our empathy, and I won't get into everything they shared, but one of the takeaways I think for some of us on staff was, the tragedy that if we're not protecting this, also that we are, we're giving all this empathy away, we're depleting it, and then we don't have anything left for our family, the people we live with. As a dad of like young kids, I was really convicted with the idea that if I'm not protecting what I'm doing with my empathy, my kids who should be in that circle of empathy are getting what I don't have. And I would just specifically on that encourage you, especially if you're parents with kids in the home, just be mindful, whether it's your media consumption or even giving too much of yourself away to people that don't deserve all of that empathy. And it's probably a longer thing that we can't totally get into. But I would say that was a big learning I had in 2021 and a conviction for that. So thanks for bringing that up. All right, I want to move to some of these questions that have come in. You can kind of think of this a little bit as like our lightning round. So we'll go a little quicker if we can. And if I cut you guys off, it's not because I don't think you're awesome, but I'm just going to keep us moving. So if we're able to put this on the screen, that's great. And we can. Oh, that's awesome. Sometimes the technology is quite helpful. So I'm also reading this on my laptop so I can manage it a little bit. And we are going to not necessarily get to all these questions, and a couple of them that are highly voted, I think we've spoken to, so I'm not going to hit everything, but let's start with this first one. By far the most popular question has been how to help young adults who are struggling with anxiety. Throw it open to whoever's willing to go there first.
Anxiety is transferable. There's an energy exchange, and so I think if you're the parent or grandparent or caregiver, one of the best things you can do is manage your own anxiety with healthy tools, and it will improve the environment. We talked a lot about social media, and we know that with fast-moving images and bright colors, your body gets more dopamine from that interaction than it does that anything the natural world can offer you. So there's nothing that could pull your brain away from that. Like if I tell my son, hey, go play on the playground or go find your friends and rollerblade on the trail, that's not going to be as interesting to his brain than roadblocks or whatever, right? It's fast and it's colorful. And so I think, limiting screens and managing our own anxiety, watching what we're talking about. Our kids are internalizing all the stuff we're hearing about the stock market and variance and, border issues, and they're hearing this, and they don't have the same tools and wisdom that we do, but we're talking about it a lot in front of them.
That's good. Our kids don't need to hear everything that we're, it's okay to not have them watching that or hearing that. Yeah. Okay, there's a really popular question about social media that I'm actually not going to move to at the moment since we've given that some time, and we're actually going to end with something on social media, so hang on there. Is anxiety worse today, or are we just more aware of it? I'm curious if this is some of what you were speaking to earlier, Jenny, about 10 years from now, or I don't know if you guys would answer this question any differently.
100% yes, anxiety is worse today. We live in an age of anxiety. That's how it's the water we're drinking. I talked about this last year, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but basically the idea of resources and challenges. You will be in a state of calm, steady, thriving when your resources and your challenges are increasing at the same rate. When the challenges you're facing every day and the resources you have to face them are somewhat matched, right? So when we are in a state where our challenges are outpacing our resources, in that one moment that happens, which for some reason I always think of being at the grocery store and realizing I don't have my wallet. You're sitting there in line and you've got to pay and you're like, I can't pay. And just that instant feeling of anxiety that comes, like I don't have what I need to do what I need to do. So that's anxiety. It's really stress. That's what stress is, right? And we all have a billion of those little moments that happen every day. Well, when that continues, when our resources keep depleting and our challenges keep increasing, that stress is going to cross over into a state of anxiety, right? That constant hum of anxiety that I'm now in this place all the time. It's not even a special moment that has to happen anymore. And then when that state continues for a long time, we can tend to get depressed because we don't have enough. When you start feeling hopeless, like I don't have enough resources for my challenges again and again and day after day after day after day. And then that translates, after having long enough without enough resources for your challenges, into it being an actual experience of trauma. And that's when you switch over into having the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Or if it's that fast and the challenge is that hard and your resources are that small, that's also what trauma is. So our anxiety is literally, I like to say, we're just math. It's just math. The next time you feel stressed, anxious, depressed, or traumatized, check in with yourself and be like, wait, what are my resources and what are my challenges? And I've got two options here. I can increase my resources or decrease my challenges. And for most of us, both of those things need to happen.
That's great. Thank you. Okay. In light of people's windows of tolerance shrinking, do you have any advice for navigating conflict with friends, family, other Christians? I had at least one or two questions very specifically on people really struggling with just heartbreak around such a harsh conflict between brothers and sisters in Christ. And I realize you guys can't necessarily speak to someone's completely specific situation, but a shrinking window, lots of conflict. Help us here.
Yeah, I'll maybe just offer a thought or two. Frequently we'll use the metaphor of, if you could just imagine, I'm going to draw a river, and on one side of the river we'll say this is where the emotions reside, and on this side of the river we'll say this is where logic and reason resides. And earlier I said something, and I don't want to be misunderstood on this point, but I'll mention it here in just a second around. I said something about don't throw a Bible verse at someone in a cavalier fashion, okay, when they are in their emotions is what I'm trying to say. So all I mean by that is this. When a person is in their emotion, if they're anxious, which is another way of saying they're afraid, They have a high level of fear. They're afraid of something. And when they're in their emotion, if we stand on the other side of the river and we sort of yell reasons that they shouldn't be afraid, how does that go if you've ever had that done to you? It feels like someone is saying, you should not feel like that, okay? And that feels like shame triggering. So not only am I scared, now I'm defective, okay? And that feels really bad. So what to do in a case like that? If you can, let me just kind of come over to your side of the river and tell me more about what you're feeling. Can you just tell me more about it? How long have you been scared? Can you tell me more about the fear? When did it start? Have you ever felt like this before? And just do that. Now, I know sometimes there's afraid of doing that because we think we're going to make it worse, but the research is so clear on this. When a person is able to speak the truth and say the word, so as men, generally, my gender, we're good about saying I'm frustrated or I'm confused, rather than saying I feel hurt by the fact that they forgot that or I wasn't invited to the meeting. Now, we don't use this language everywhere. We're talking about with the people we love, our best friend, our spouse. But when somebody asks us who cares, we want to be honest with them. And so when we can be honest, so when we're on their side of the river and we can ask them and they can say to us, literally, that's what helps. They've seen this through fMRI scans on the brain. They've done research, and when they've given people a chance to say the emotion from a picture they're looking at, you can literally see on the brain scan, it moves from the limbic part of the brain to the prefrontal cortex, which is where people make sense of it. It's not as scary now, now that I've talked it through. And so now we can go back together on the logic and reason side of the river, and we'll go to school tomorrow, okay?
That's great.
Or we'll talk more about our budget tomorrow or whatever we need.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thanks, Pike.
Okay.
That's great. All right, let me just keep this moving. There's a question about transgender, and I'm going to skip it even though it's popular because I'm going to share a next step connected to that at the very end of the night. I want to hit on a couple things that we haven't talked about and just scroll down a little bit. We have a question, what should we look for when trying to find a therapist? If one of you, just really practical, if someone's never gone to counseling before, just one or two tips on this.
The number one indicator of success is trust. You know, it's not necessarily going to be the modalities that they're trained in or that their schedule aligns with yours, although there are some logistics around that. If you were to call the Refuge Center, we're going to ask you 3 questions. What's your presenting concern? What qualities are important to you in a counselor? And what's your scheduling availability? So there are those parameters that help you get connected to the right person, but you need to make sure that you feel safe with this person. And safety we look at through the lens of feeling seen, safe, secure, and soothed. That I know I'm not going to be judged, that I know that what I say here is going to stay confidential, that I can bring up anything that might feel really scary to talk about or that I'm afraid my church friends might know about me, and that this person is going to listen to me with a compassionate presence and see me in the context of my hurts and wounds. And so if you sit with someone and they have all the degrees and expertises in the world, but you don't feel a connection and you don't feel trust, then you move on until you do feel that.
That's great. And just on this, we have a great counselor referral network, of which all 3 of these people are part of. This should be so normal to talk about. And odds are you have a friend who has seen a therapist they love, and it doesn't mean they're the right person for you, but man, ask some people. Like a lot of my coworkers and us on staff, I know who my coworkers that love their therapist. We talk about these things. It's okay, it's normal, and it would be our privilege to help you navigate this. A very popular question. I feel like we've talked a bit about anxiety, but I do want to touch on something here. How do we support or encourage people who suffer? A lot of our conversation has been about ourselves, but as we do look to someone we care about, how can we encourage or support someone who's suffering?
Well, I'll just say this. We've talked about this a little bit, and you all had a chance to experience 2 minutes worth there at your table. If you can, and I'll offer a book here too, by the way, as a recommendation. There's a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzaro. Some of you know it. In that book, he talks about the idea of certainly practicing presence with God, but he talks about practicing presence with people. And a lot of that, as we've talked, as my friends here have talked, and you experience at your table, the idea of being present with other people is so healing when they are safe and you feel comfortable with them. And so if you can step into someone's life and be present with them, give them a little time, just give them what you can. And it is the presence of a safe person that helps a person calm down. If you take a child who is anxious and scared, and the mom or the dad goes into the room and they pick them up and they hold them, what happens? Eventually they calm down, because your calmness will begin to help them not be as afraid, and they'll feel like whatever they're facing, they're at least not alone. So time is such a precious commodity, we can't get it back, but if you can give some, whatever you can give, don't worry about what you can't do what you can as you're able. That's an awesome thing, and one of the things we lack for right now is people who will find time or make time to step into the hard place with people. So, that's good.
All right, I think last question, and then I want to talk about some next steps and invite you guys to share any final words. What tips can you offer families on ways to improve mental health in the home? You're making me nervous, guys.
No.
You're the experts. Let me ask, if I can, Pike, I know your kids have been out of the house for a bit, but Amy, would you, without sharing stuff that you wouldn't care to share, what are some things you try to do in your home?
Well, we do talk about emotions. My husband, I think, had to step out, but he does a great job of modeling that for our sons and saying, I know that you say you're angry right now, but I'm wondering if there's fear under there, if there's sadness under there. And so he's done a lot of his own work, and I'm just really proud of how he models that for our kids. Going back to the pressures that our kids are facing, your kids don't have to have a phone. You don't have to give your child a phone in 4th grade. They don't have to have TikTok and Snapchat in 6th grade. They're going to tell you what? Everybody has a phone. I will say this, not to brag on myself, but my 15-year-old doesn't have a phone. And I just say that so that when you go home and tell your child, you can say, I know one other person whose child.
On that, I was a youth pastor for a while. I know a lot of 15-year-olds who are the only 15-year-old without a phone, honestly. And I think if they could all get in the room together, there's hundreds of them right here in our schools. And so to just encourage and add on to what you're saying, Amy, I meet a lot of these students and parents.
He had a phone in 6th grade, and his alarm is set for 6 a.m., and I couldn't believe by 6:15 how many group chats were already happening and how much chaos and drama was happening in the first 15 minutes of the day. And I couldn't tolerate that as an adult with lots of resources and skills. And so it's just too much for our kids, and it's really okay. I mean, you're in charge of the decisions around their education. You tell them to go to school. You tell them that you want them to play sports. You can also really parent around this issue and not feel bullied into the everybody does it thing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to say that my kids are 20 and 22, and it was as slow and as fast as everybody says that it's going to be. And the last 4 years that they lived at home, I kind of had that oh my God, I only have 2 more years left with my son and 4 more years left with my daughter, and where did that go and what was I doing? And it actually was the beginning of me starting to study the impacts that media was having on my mental health and our family's development. So I would say for myself, the number one thing that I did, and I still continue to try to do, is that when I'm with my kids, there are no screens for me. That no screen ever comes before my kid. And the older that they are, the less time the less face-to-face time that you have with them. And that has continued as they're adults. It's still it's just our thing. When you're with a person, there's no screen that comes before that. person. There's no checking it. It's like, nope, you are the person. And it was just 2 years with my son and 4 years with my daughter. But when they left home, I can't even begin to explain the feeling that I didn't miss it. I missed a lot of things, but I did not miss a minute with them. And that's just, it healed us. It healed them. It healed me. It allowed them to launch in a different way. It allowed me to let go of them in a different way. So that's my number one.
Thank you, Jenny. All right, there are, look, we're a church, and it was a team of our pastors who organized tonight because we knew it would be important to hear from this group, but also in hopes that for some of us, many of us, that tonight could be the next right step for you, and maybe we could share a couple other possible next steps. I know I've made some jokes tonight to kind of just lighten the mood. Our staff feels such a privilege to be invited into your life at whatever level you invite us in, and to just play a small part in walking with you as you try to steward your pain and loss and experiences. And so I just want to share, and we've had these handouts, we'll put a couple screens up. The timing of tonight's event was purposeful with some other things that we have happening, because I hope that for many of you, something is stirring in you and you're considering, okay, what might be the next right step to me? So I'm just going to move through quickly, but with a couple details, and then just invite you guys to share anything else, and we'll be out of here in 10 minutes. Could I actually grab one of those handouts, if you guys don't mind? Sorry. So, Robbie, just bear with me. I know you're doing the slides. Most of you should be able to look at these, but we'll also put a bit of this on the screen. First, our support and growth classes. We mentioned this morning at church, if you were here with us in Franklin. This fall was really the first time that we were able to sort of bring some more organization and strategy to when we offer classes and what they are. And really, the classes we've created have been curated in mind with the things that we've been hearing from you guys. So it's not random. It is our attempt to prayerfully respond to some of the needs we're either hearing from community group leaders or those of you who've been meeting with our pastors. And a couple I just want to highlight. Divorce care. If you found yourself walking through divorce and you could appreciate a support community there. Grief share. We've talked a lot tonight about grief and loss. Heart of Man is a men's emotions group, which I've been told is already on a waiting list. So if you guys know any other male therapists who are available on Tuesday nights, we'll keep doing that. Regeneration, or Regen for shorthand, is our Christian recovery ministry that we have here at the church. Some of you may be familiar with CR. I'll say I'm a big believer in Regen. My wife, Lacey, is actually one of the volunteer leaders with Regen. And I know we have some people here who are wrestling with addictions and substance abuse. And the sweet thing about Regen, and obviously this is true of CR as well, for some of us, we don't immediately think that we need recovery, but those 12 steps with a Christ-centered focus can help us address that relationship with the voice inside our head. And so many things like codependency or challenges from our childhood are addressed well there, and just really believe in that. Alpha is a great gathering for people exploring the Christian faith with questions about faith. It really is designed to be a really safe space for people who maybe aren't as churched or have as much of a Christian background. And then Grace and Truth, this is actually the first time we will be facilitating this class, but Grace and Truth it'll be a 6-week group on helping us engage the LGBT conversation from a Christian perspective. And I know we had a question in there about gender identity, and I frankly would never want to give a 5-minute response to a question like that. It's so important to us that we step into that space with grace and truth and humility. And this will be the first time we've had like a weekly gathering at hosting those conversations. We actually have some other classes as well, but those were the 6 we wanted to highlight in light of tonight. Those are all beginning, I believe, February 15th. Those are on Tuesday nights. If we can just hit a couple others. If we could talk, so If you're hearing this and you're like, I just need to pray with someone, we have a really fantastic prayer ministry. We have freedom prayer sessions available. We have noonday prayer every Wednesday where you can come and pray with people. You can see the prompt there. And then the link for the classes. I'd love to also just, I don't know if this is queued up, Robbie, but the area map. Okay, just a quick mention. Robbie and Brad, and if Ashley and Troy are still here, I saw them earlier, just stand up. I just want the area pastors to just kind of be visible for a moment. Look, I know a lot of you have been here a long time. You know these guys. Some of you are brand new to our church. Just to mention, we have the church divided up into geographic areas as a means to pastor you and support you and help you get involved. So Ashley on the back of my right, Ashley is our South area pastor. If you imagine like an X coming off the church here, so like all the neighborhoods off Lewisburg Pike down into Thompson Station, Spring Hill. Brad in the middle there is our North area pastor, kind of. Brad, you have Cool Springs, kind of? You and Robbie fight over it a little bit. So Cool Springs, Grassland area, and then up into Brentwood and Davidson County. And then Robbie is our East area pastor. Also a lot of neighborhoods just to our east of this building. And then Troy Weirman's our West area pastor. He was here earlier. One of the first things you said tonight, Pike, was to just be able to name something and say it out loud to another human. I think for many of us, you may not associate joining a community group with part of your mental health journey, but if you do not have a regular group of Christians that you see as safe people, that you just talk about things that matter with, you need that. And by all means, if you have that outside of the Church of the City ecosystem, that's cool. We're not like, whatever. But I've learned, like, many of us don't. And I think it's far few, of the people who are not in a community group, many of them should be. Not all, but many. And the thing, in case you don't know this, like, if you're like, hey, I'd like to do that, but like I don't feel safe even like necessarily inviting strangers. Like, does it have to be a super open group that anyone in my neighborhood could come to? It doesn't have to be. We have a lot of groups like that because that's what the leaders of those groups feel called to. If you kind of have an idea for a group that's more closed, but you'd love to form it and just have our church support you, we do that with a lot of groups. And also, if all this is going on, you're like, yeah, I don't know that I want to do anything, but I would love to sit down with a pastor for 30 minutes or an hour, that's what those guys are here for. So if you're like, I'd love to talk to a pastor, but I don't want them to ask me to join a group, that's fine. 6 months from now, hopefully you'll join a group. But Ashley and Brad and Robbie and Troy had to step out. They'd love to just talk to you. And then, of course, if you can't tell yet, like, we are big. There's Troy. Hey, I was just talking about you. Troy's our west area, like downtown Franklin, 96 West, West Haven, out that way. We're big fans of Christian counseling here. I've mentioned that. Obviously, it's a real treat to have you guys. Lindsay Harris, who's in the back of the room. Lindsay's sort of like our in-house mental health expert, and in a lot of ways is like our church's secret weapon. Lindsay really helped make tonight happen. And Lindsay, over years, has curated a really phenomenal counselor referral network. These are people she has met with, that she's gotten to know. So if you're sitting here thinking, like, I think counseling might be for me, but I'm a little wary of it, Lindsay's done the work. And if you can kind of combine some of Amy's advice with the resources Lindsay's created, I think for many, maybe not everybody here, but for many of us, that would be a next right step. Specifically on pursuing counseling, a lot of people here are like, well, yeah, I want to meet with Pike or Amy or Jenny. They're the best. You're not going to stick me with some other doofus. I can say this, but can you, like, there are so many great therapists in the area. Like, anything on that of finding a counselor that you guys would want to say?
I'll just say, as a counselor, part of our ethic is to help the client find exactly what they need. And we will refer people to other counselors in the community if we feel that they are better served there. So we are totally comfortable doing that. And as a result, we know a lot of people in the community that have had really good experience out there. So we're glad to help with that too. One of the things I do love about Refuge is Amy's heart has always been, we're not here to compete with other providers. We're here to find them, and let's work on this together and support one another. So we definitely would love to help with that if we can. I think, not speaking for Amy, but I've been around her long enough to know that's her heart. So
Thanks, Pike.
yeah.
So in a moment when we dismiss you guys, we do want to, at least as much as supplies last, we want to just offer you a free gift as you leave. We talked a bit about media tonight, and our friend Jenny here has written a book. And the Refuge Center. Collaboration, right? So I have it here. How to Be Human in a Digital World by Jenny and the Refuge Center. And I don't think we have enough for you to take multiples. If you're thinking about the 5 people on your street that need this, don't take them all. But please, if this would serve you, take it with you. The church is going to purchase them because we just believe in the work you guys are doing. We think it's such an important conversation, and we want to resource you in that way. And then just anything you guys want to say before we get going?
Yes, I have one thing. I have this concept called inside treats. Like if you're leaving tonight and you're wondering what can I do to resource myself or resource society in this very depleted time, it's to give and receive inside treats. So when my niece was little, she was kind of done potty training, but she thought I might be in on it, and she went to the bathroom and came out and told me, I went to the bathroom. And I was like, wow. And she said, so do you have any candy for me? And I said, oh, I do have a treat for you. It's an inside treat. And she was like, what? And I was like, inside, you feel so good that you peed in the potty instead of in your pants? Like, doesn't that feel great? She was like, she didn't fall for it. But my daughter one day held the door open. I mean, y'all, this is so easy. So don't leave tonight thinking this is complicated stuff. She held the door open for a man and his son at the gym, and they just smiled at her and said thank you. And she came home talking about it. And one of my friends had an idea of asking, how many likes does that feeling equal? And she tried to think of a number and tried to think of a number, and she was like, 1,000, 1,000,000. I've never had or can never imagine having enough likes on something I post that gave me that feeling of that man smiling and saying thank you, and his son seeing it, of holding the door open. So do not minimize how really simple and easy it can be to give and receive those treats when they come to you.
Right. Thank you so much. Can we thank our fantastic guest? All right. Let me pray for us and then get going. God, I just want to confess, you are so kind to us. God, you are so good. You are a good father, God. You are a perfect parent who knows how to give good gifts to his children. And so, God, we just make space right now to recognize that we all may be feeling different things tonight. And when you look at each of us, you see your sons and daughters who you love so much. And it delights you to give us what we need. And so I just pray specific prayers that we would be able to receive, that we would be able to posture ourselves to receive what we need from you, God. And if someone needs to be reminded that they are seen, God, I pray specifically in the next 24 hours in a way that's so personal that you would show them that you see them. God, if there is someone who needs just one safe person to say out loud, I've been so sad the last couple weeks, God, I pray that you would bring that relationship to bear. God, you're just so good. And sometimes the struggle is to just make ourselves vulnerable enough to be open to receiving your goodness. And it's, Sunday night, 8-ish. God, I just pray before the sun goes down tomorrow that you would remind each person here just how good you are and how much you love them. We pray these things in Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys so much. Have a great week.